Kavin, thank you for coming to the show.
Jose, glad to be here.
And I think we're really getting to the core of the adaptable chameleon today with how much we are poised to go into inside our minds today and our inner workings. And Kavin, for the people that don't know you, I think it's going to be quite interesting to hear about your origin story. So how you got involved with neuroscience, neuroradiology, and all the resilience work.
Jose, so I've been in the neuroimaging field for 20 plus years. When I first started my radiology residency, and my first few days when I started, they started putting up these CAT scan images and MRI images of the brain. And my first thought was, how come these 30, 40-year-olds, their brains look like they're 50, 60-year-olds? And it was interesting because I have looked at the books and read the normal scans, in the books, but in reality, what I saw that people on my screen had bodies and brains that were much older than their age, and hence their biological age was much more advanced compared to their chronological age or their age in birthday candles. And it's interesting, one of the terms we use in radiology is we say no acute disease. It's a cute term where if that means nothing is immediately wrong, which is true. On all these scans, nothing was obviously wrong, but my underlying question was, well, isn't it wrong that this guy's brain looks much more advanced in age than his chronological age? And nobody wanted to really address that, at least in none of my seniors or none of the attendings. And so this question stayed with me. And so over the past 20 years, I probably have about 300,000 plus exams under my belt. And what you wind up seeing is that when you go through that volume of work, you start seeing patterns. And the patterns that I started putting them and categorizing them, that what is making people age faster. And what is interesting is that I started categorizing this, and it wound up being 7 key buckets, 7 key areas where people can address that is aging them faster. And so a year and a half ago, I took all that information and compiled it into a book. So my book is called Primal Health Design, and it's 7 key paradigms to reverse biological age. So it was taking all those 7 buckets and putting it in a book. And what is interesting is that I started also seeing exceptions. I started seeing 70, 80-year-olds whose brains look like they were 40 or 50. And I said, this guy is doing something right. And so then I started learning from these exceptions that what are they doing correctly to actually reverse their biological age. And so that's been my work, is to just inspire people to make those changes in those 7 domains.
What was the most, let's say, unexpected trait in those 70 and 80-year-olds that you found?
So the overall theme, Jose, that I saw was that the closer people live to their primal design. When I mean primal, is that the way your body was designed to be. And when I was growing up, my dad was with the United Nations, so which meant that we lived all over the world. I've changed 22 houses, lived in Africa, Europe, and many, many places. My childhood from 5 to 10 years was in Africa. And there, his work involved working in the rural areas where we interacted with tribes in that area. And interestingly, he would take me with him when he was going on these sort of site visits and things like that. And so I got to be with him and I got to interact with a lot of these African tribes. And why I mention all this is that as I was writing this book and I was getting into this longevity research, one of the things that they mentioned was that, you know, the people who live the healthiest and the longest are the ones that are living very primally, are living closer to that original design. And they mentioned that there's a tribe in Africa. There's a specific tribe called Hadza tribe or Hadzabe that have a very low incidence of chronic diseases in terms of very little diabetes, very little blood pressure issues, really negligible mental health issues and everything like that. And so they said that this tribe is being studied because of their primal living, because these guys are hunter-gatherer tribes. They live out in nature. They pretty much eat whatever is found in nature. They don't, not, exposed to any processed foods or anything like that. But it turned out that I'm like, where is this tribe located? And they said, okay, it's in Tanzania. And then I said, okay, Tanzania, and looked in the map. And it turned out that that was the exact tribe that I was hanging out with when I grew up, So it goes all full circle that like the tribe that is being studied for longevity will be the same tribe that I hung out with and grew up with for many years during my childhood. So I could talk about these primal practices from a position of experience because I was there as a child. And so a short answer to your question is that the closer we are to our primal design, the healthier we are and the more gracefully we age.
In terms of primal design, is it the types of behaviors that we perform in our day-to-day? Is it our diet? How would you define that primal design?
So there are different levels of primal design when I talk about in the book. And so first is definitely the physical aspects of how we connect with the earth, body, and food. Those are the three primary connections. When I say earth, which means that how in sync your body is with the cycles of the earth, in terms of the circadian rhythm. Body is that,
So
what is your...
level?
Sorry?
At a day level, so the 24-hour cycle.
Yes, the 24-hour cycle, right? Like the sunrise and the sunset. The sunrise and the sunset are primal triggers. Your body is already responding to those things. But nowadays we think that we have our own schedule. What's wrong if I sleep at 2 a.m.? You know what I'm saying? That and I wake up at 11 a.m. That's my schedule, right? That's true. That could be your schedule, but your body has its own schedule that is responding to the circadian rhythm. And hence the mismatch between the way we live and the way our body wants to live according to the natural cycles. So that's what we talk about in terms of primal design, connecting with the earth. Connecting with the body is your body has a certain geometry. It likes to be positioned in a certain way to be optimal. Okay. And we talk about like primal alignment. And that's one of the things I teach through the book and through my courses is what does that mean to have that primal alignment, right? So that's connecting with the body. Connecting with the food is, what is our body looking for from food? In a sense that what is it actually the food is providing, right? Like, so there are many different things and we're finding that except for the taste aspect of food that we eat food for, there's a much more that your body's trying to get out of the food in terms of, basics people talk about is macronutrients, micronutrients and whatnot. But beyond that, there's a lot of other things that what is nourishing our gut microbiome and whatnot, which is really what we're finding is the foundational pieces for health. So that's the physical aspect. And then in the book, I also get into the mental aspect, the emotional aspect. And then finally, the final piece is about like the existential aspect of our health. And existential is that, coming to terms with the fact that we are all mortal. We all have an expiration date. So that when you live with that reality, when you come to terms with that reality, you're much more, you cherish each day. You live each day with intention. And then I think that becomes an important part of health.
It's really fascinating because it seems like, not not to oversimplify, but it seems like one of the key, let's say, heuristics there is to essentially live a minimalistic life. Because in our day-to-day life, in our modern life, if you will, we're surrounded by technology, we're surrounded by too much information, we're surrounded by, that search for significance, that search for what it means to be myself, what it means to have my own goals. But it seems like that healthy uh, connecting thread through life is actually to just be more with yourself and with the things that our planet provides, in a sense.
That's correct, Jose. At least for the first aspect of improving our physical health, it's, I would say it's about less and not more. Sometimes we want to do all these things that, and we make things more complicated. And if we simplify it and just ask the question, is what is our primal design? How are we? Because when I was with these tribesmen in Africa, they didn't have a gym. They didn't have a grocery store. They didn't have a refrigerator. They weren't, they were eating what was found in nature. They didn't think about 10,000 steps. That was their lifestyle. Their lifestyle automatically put them outdoors, and they were very active. We don't talk about sitting too much or standing desks or anything like that, because that was their lifestyle. So being as close to your primal design automatically makes you healthy on many of these levels.
It's so interesting that despite all these thousands of years, we're still very biologically reliant on the way we were rather than we were today, or than we are today, rather.
Jose, and part of that is that if you look at our genes, they have evolved over. If you look at ancient man, that's hundreds and thousands of years, right? But modern society is only few hundred years. Even if you take the most modern developed places, right, there maybe 1,000 years, like that. If you look at places in Egypt and in India and whatnot.
Mhm.
But beyond that, the primal man, right? Like when you look at that, that's hundreds and thousands of years. So your genetics is primal, but your lifestyle is modern, and hence the mismatch.
We're going around and around in circles, trying to fit the square into a circle, essentially, with the modern life.
Correct. And your body is already designed in a different way, like you said, right? You have a circle of genetics, and now you're trying to fit this peg of square peg in that circle, and that's a good analogy there.
What, because, it's so ingrained in us right now. For example, if you're a knowledge worker, you end up spending most of your day sitting, unfortunately. That's why then you start to think, oh, did I do my 10,000 steps today? Am I going to the gym today? So, in from your experience of working with people, what has been the essentially the most effective way for people to start to move back toward that primal design and not just get stuck in their modern ways?
So, Jose, we also have to be practical. We cannot tell people that, okay, just kind of give up everything, go live in the forest, and everything will be okay, and then that's not practical, because you got to earn a living and uh, provide for yourself and your family and everything like that. But at the same time, we know that sitting all day is a lifestyle that is working against our genetics. Okay, our body and everything in our body is positioned to respond to movement, and to respond to lifting heavy weights and utilizing our muscles and everything like that. Once it does not get those stimuli, your body starts degrading. Your hormone levels goes down in men. Testosterone levels go
Mm-hmm.
down. A lot of those healthy hormones that keep your mental status sane. Kind of like that. That aspect of serotonin release that keeps you happy and joyful also gets impacted with all of this. So if we know all that, we can say that how can we, and that's my work, is that how can we implement practices that bring that primal element into our life, and for example, for somebody, let's say, who has a desk job, and I have a desk, I'm sure, a job, I'm sure you sit around all day
Mm-hmm.
too with a lot of the work you do. So what can we do? And some of the simple things is, one is checking our alignment, making sure that we are not in our alignment is not working for us. What I mean by that, if you look at the way most people sit in front of a computer, they're hunched over, their shoulders are rolled forward, the head is forward. That puts a lot of unnecessary stress and strain on our muscles of behind on the back. That causes a lot of neck tension. That neck tension again impacts your mood and everything like that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with the mid back. So first thing is I tell people how to align themselves. And then I would say that every hour that you sit down, I would get up and there are a couple of studies. One is study says that for every hour that if you do just like 10 squats, like just regular air squats, that it undoes the damage that the sitting is doing to all your main muscles, like your glutes and hamstrings and everything like that. The other aspect is that your body also needs vibration, like when you kind of your foot lands on the ground, that subtle vibration. So one of the things I have people do is that for every minute you sit, you should do like one jumping jack. So which means that, let's say you take a break every 30 minutes, do 30 jumping jacks, which will take you, I don't know, like that will take you like 30 seconds or maybe 40 seconds to do. But that that movement and that vibration on your bones signals your bones that, oh, okay, this guy is actually alive. And then I need to maintain these bones. Otherwise your body gets the signal that, all right, well, what do I need all this bone density for? What do I need all these muscles for? So you start letting go of all these. And then that's why we have people with like low bone density, osteopenia, osteoporosis, low muscle mass. We call that sarcopenia. And then that overall, that type of a sitting pattern and sedentary pattern leads to a lot of health issues. So if you're like that in your 30s and 40s, you're going to have a very difficult time in your 50s and 60s for sure.
That's very important to hear, especially because, nowadays going to the gym, eating your protein is much more in vogue, if you will. But the bone part of the equation, I think it's still missing. It's still not as understood even. Because you can be sitting for 8 hours, go to, for example, deadlifts in the gym. Awesome. You literally lifted heavy things. But it was those 45 minutes compared to the 8 hours in the entire day.
It doesn't compare. And in fact, like a lot of the research also shows that you cannot make up for 8 hours of sitting by just going to the gym, because that 8 hours of sitting itself is that's a third of your day sitting. So how are you going to compensate for that by just going to the gym? And I think also on a larger uh, longer term scale, the you're you're also putting yourself at risk by just sitting all day and then going to the gym, because overall your bones are getting weaker in that process. So your people are more prone to injury when it's just sort of like that piecemeal and happening, let's say just a small part of your day. And the they have this term called weekend warriors, where your whole week you don't do any activity, and then on the weekend you decide to go out and like be really active, and catch up. But that catch up process doesn't really work. So you have to design your day hence the title of my book is Primal Health Design, is that how do you design your day so that you incorporate these primal elements in your everyday life?
And you've already touched base on this, the sort of third element of the equation, which was the mental health domain. And one thing that I found really interesting that you've addressed is that initially when you spoke of the Tanzanian tribe, you mentioned that even their mental health was at a higher level of health than people in modern life. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but the interpretation I got is that going back to that primal design and going back to that life of less instead of more is actually what helped them connect better with themselves and, for example, not create so much stress and so much anxiety about things that don't matter.
Jose, one of the things that we all struggle with in modern life is we play ping pong between two sides. We are either, if I take an inventory of everybody's thoughts, it would fall into two buckets. One bucket is some regrets of the past, right? You're thinking of something that happened in the past, and I should have done this. Well, how come you said that to me? All this kind of those kinds of thoughts. And then the second bucket is some anxiety or anticipation of the future, right? You're always thinking, oh, I got to do this, I got to get that done, I want to make sure that thing is done, that is like that. And so you play ping pong, right? You go some regrets of the past, something of the past, something of the future. So you play ping pong, but you never pay attention to what is in front of you and the present and the here and now. And that's why you see families or you see couples go on a date and they're both on their phone, and here you have like this great partner or potential partner in front of you, and you're on the date, but you're checking your phone. Or you see families, right? You see families, father, mother, and like all the kids, and everybody's on their phone in the restaurant. Here you are with your family, which is like the most important time that could be. You're at this great restaurant eating a meal, and everybody is either you're checking old messages or you're planning something about the future. So you're still playing that ping pong between the past and the future, but your family is sitting in front of you right here and now, and you don't pay attention. And so that's the issue we all struggle with, right? With modernity, right? And modern life. And so when you look at these primal cultures, particularly the Hadza tribe, that I grew up with, they had to be present because there was, if you were not present of your circumstances or what was in front of you, there could be a lion in the bush that could come and get you, and because their environment was such that it made them be in the here and now, you know and that gave them a lot of presence in the here and now. And I believe that is very, very powerful to be in the here and now, because it gives you presence. It makes you more alive, because otherwise you're just living your past and the future, which is not even real. But you miss the life, the reality that is in front of you.
That's incredibly powerful. And underpinning this entire conversation, really, we're talking about tribes. We often do those metaphors of, oh, you have the amygdala firing up right now because it's your genes of what if the lion will come after you and you had to run. And here we are right now talking about people literally running away from lions. And in the modern world, because, fortunately, we typically are not running away from wild animals, the proxy that we end up dealing with is, oh, hey, is my boss going to send me that bad email? Am I going to be in trouble? So hearing about these, truly primal examples is actually both eye-opening and grounding.
Jose, and that aspect of having that awareness and that mechanism to have that acute stress, right? So if a lion jumps in
Mhm.
front of you, you better be present and be you better be stressed out, or you have to have that stress response to be able to either fight or flight. You know what I'm saying? And I don't think they're going to be fighting the lion, but they're going to be more like running away from the lion, right? But kidding aside, in but when that acute stress was over, they also had a deep moments of relaxation where they were that whole stress response was completely turned off. When they were eating, they were eating. When they were sitting by the fire, they were sitting by the fire. They weren't checking, they weren't checking text messages while sitting by the fire. You know what I'm saying? Well, we what we have is we have neither of those. We don't have a lion jumping in front of us, so we don't have a super acute stress, but we don't have the full turn off mode where we're fully relaxed either. We don't have that mechanism, or most people can't sit by the fire and then just enjoy the fire. So you don't have that on switch and you don't have an off switch. So your switch is like stuck in the middle, where you're doing everything kind of like half-hearted in a way. You know what I'm saying? Even when you're doing fun things, you're still not fully engaged in that fun thing, because you're still back of your head, you're thinking, oh, I got to do this thing to do, I got to finish this, and I got to get to this appointment, I got this scheduled. So even when you're doing something enjoyable, you're still only half of you is there, the other half is already planning other things. And hence the problem. Yeah.
Is this something that you would relate to that feeling of boredom? Because, for example, eating your lunch in front of your screen while you're watching like an episode from your favorite show, that's not boring. That's highly stimulant to you. But you're also, for example, not present in the moment of enjoying your food. Like you're not, quote unquote, sitting in the campfire eating your food. Is that one of those moments where you advocate for people stepping back and feeling a little bored to actually enjoy the present?
Most people have not completely experienced the present, because if people do, there's so much life in it. Just sometimes, even if you could sit and just observe your breath and be fully present right now, that feeling of just being here is so tremendous that you don't really even need any stimulation. You could be just out in the sun, in the lawn, or somewhere sitting on a bench and just be fully there. If people can actually experience that, they'll realize that it's way better than any TV show, because that's life. You're experiencing the here and now and life as it is, right? What could be better than that? It's it's the reality that you're experiencing, right? You're watching a TV show that was recorded years ago or months ago. How can that compete with something that is alive and in front of you right now? Which is, when you actually experience it, it is way more powerful. And so part of my work is getting people to break out of that past, break out of the future, and actually drop into the now. And because that is when we know that your body functions the best, and being present and here and now.
What are some common ways that you found that have A, resonated with people, and B, been efficient in getting people to recenter more towards the present?
So there are many things we can do to get people to drop into the now. And part of it is focusing on things that are happening in the now. So the question becomes, what is happening in the now? Well, your heart is beating in the now. If you were in front of a waterfall, it could be the water falling, which is happening in the now. It's right. If you look at a candle, that is burning in the now. But the easiest tool for people is their breath, because you cannot breathe in the past and you cannot breathe in the future. Your breath, every breath is in the now. So every breath, if you pay attention to your breath, it automatically drops you into the present because the breath is always in the now. And what neuroscience says is that when people can focus on something in the now, let's say your breath, and you have breath awareness, you can start with few minutes and you kind of work yourself up, let's say a couple of minutes to 5 minutes to 10 minutes. But if you're able to maintain that awareness of your breath for 15 plus minutes, close to 20 minutes, automatically your physiology and your whole brain, that kind of that anxious component that is bouncing between the past and the future and everything like that, will center and kind of drop into the present. And it is something that it's a phenomenon we call flow. And you may have heard that term. People use that term flow. And
Yes.
flow is it's focused attention where all that anxiety about, so they use this flow state with athletes because one of the things with an athlete, let's say you're a basketball player and you're about to make that shot, right?
Hmm.
The issue, or you're a hockey player and you're about to take that shot, right? The issue you are fighting with is, one, your brain wants to think about all the past misses you had. And it's like, oh my God, is this going to be one of those misses where, people laugh at me? I miss it. I missed this final goal. Or that's about the past, or you're projecting something about the future and you say, oh, what if I do make it in, and then people will celebrate me, and I'll show up on TV and things like. So now you're fighting this, right? Because your brain right now is not focused really on actually the here and now hitting that puck, but it's focused on the past and the future of what. So what works with athletes is when you kind of get them to have breath awareness and drop into the now, this whole brain rumination about the past and the future drops, and they drop into the present, and all they can see is the puck and the goal. So when it's just the puck and the goal, it is very, very relaxing. It's because you're in the present and now you can function with that state of flow. And so that's a whole body of research about getting into that space of flow, or getting into that zone people talk about.
I think within the explanation we're providing just now as well, in terms of what you're thinking about in the past failures, for example, ways in they were not sufficient to the task, and in the future in terms of, oh, if I make the shot, I will have all of this. It's almost like, in a sense, as you're doing the ping pong between past and future, it's almost like, in a way, you're confronting your shame of times you were not up to the task, and at the same time lost a version of, I can have all of this if I don't fail. But hearing you talk about breath work as a way to bring yourself to the present, speaking from my personal experience, I think it really resonates, and it's something I had never realized so far, that it's truly the one thing that, hey, it's always in the present. There's never past or future to a breath. You're taking the breath as is right now. And B, it truly brings you to the present, because you need to focus deeply to have a good controlled breath. And if you don't breathe, life doesn't go on for you because you need to breathe. So I think it's really truly fascinating that breath is that key unlock to bring you back to the present.
And it's been used all throughout the ages. Breath work. In fact, in India, if you ever get a chance, you can Google this. There is a whole branch of yoga called Anapanasati yoga. So the term means, anapana means out breath and in breath. Sati meaning awareness. And yoga means union, meaning you have a union of your mind and body, right? So what this whole body, this whole branch of yoga says that just by you being aware of your in breath and out breath, and you stay there, that will give you that union of the mind and body where you become present in both those terms. And this has been talked, the whole base of Buddhism is based on these kinds of practices. So, and it's something that we all are struggling with. And but the solution is so simple, right? Yeah, most people don't want to hear that. Most people say, "Well, just be aware of your breath." Like that's it. What's the technique? Give me a technique. No, that's the technique. The technique is be aware of your breath. But it's not an easy thing, because when you sit down and you start to be aware of your breath, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I got to take out the laundry. I got to call this guy. Your attention is going to stray right away. Then you got to pull it back and back to your breath. But those corrections where your mind strays and you come back, and you strays and you come back, those are what we talk about, those reps that you're putting in to develop that level of focus. And that's why it requires some level of training and whatnot. But once you can get into that space, it's beautiful.
So speaking as someone that has not really done meditation, but has sort of, let's say, a periphery interest in it, would you say that meditation is something that will help you to have that more controlled breath and, have control of your breath throughout your days? Or is something that, you can just jump to controlling your breath, being aware of your breath, and not necessarily go through that meditation step?
Jose, I think it's a continuum. I usually don't like to use the word meditation, because most people are scared of that word, because they always have this thing in their head that, oh, I cannot meditate. I'm not a meditative person. And I tell people, I said, I get that. Let's put that word aside for now. Okay. But can you focus on your breath? Can you have some deliberate focus of your breath? And just sit there. Don't control your breath, but just let it come in and go out naturally, but just be focused on it. And most people can do that. Okay. Most people are able to do that. Okay. And so if you can start there, and once that practice develops into 5 minutes, like I said, 10 minutes, 15 minutes plus, and closer to 20 minutes, when you're in that, what we call it about in that zone, that already is a form of meditation. You know what I'm saying? So in a way, you will become meditative, not by meditating, but by just having that focus. So for most people, you cannot meditate for sure. Meditation is not something you do. Meditation is something that happens, right? So you cannot do meditation, but meditation, you can create the environment for meditation to happen. And the environment for meditation is what I just talked about, is this process. And so I tell people, forget about meditation. Just set the environment so that automatically you will get into that space.
I can definitely see it's almost like a branding problem of I don't identify myself as someone who can meditate, so breath work might not be for me. But again, you go back to the wording and the perspective. Can you focus on your breath? Just feel it come in and out, and people can actually go down that route of worrying about your breath, being more conscious, and ultimately be in the meditative state.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, I like to just take away that stigma for people, because I think people just need instructions. And sometimes you can say, what's the instructions for meditation? Well, there are really no instructions, because it's a state that occurs. It's not something you do. It happens, right? And so, like you said, that I think the more simplified approach we give people, the more likely they're able to do it and kind of build up their stamina for it.
And one other thing I'd like to touch with you is, so we're sort of, let's say, in the restorative state of, okay, you have all these problems, you have all this stress, you're struggling day to day, but worrying, or sorry, being more careful about your breath work, and ideally arriving at this meditative state can center or recenter you. So one of the problems that people deal with day to day is, you know, putting in the reps, dealing with work, dealing with family issues, dealing with whatever piece of hell they need to go through at the moment. And so that requires a lot of resilience. And of course, resilience is a big part of your work as well. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what kind of practices can people follow to build their resilience, even if just a little bit more.
So, Jose, what I tell people is this, is when we want to handle life, we have to design our day so that it can handle life, right? And for most people, they're what part of the day do they really have control over that we have to look at, right? One is the beginning of the day when you wake up and before you go to work, right? That time gap. It's different for everybody depending on what time you wake up or how early you wake up. You can extend, create that block of time. But let's
Mm-hmm.
say it's half an hour, let's say it's an hour, but it's the time from when you wake up to when you go to work. It is your time because that you can curate that time. And then you have a block of time before you go to bed, maybe half an hour or preferably an hour before you go to bed. And I say that, tell people that these are your bookends, right? And I like to use the analogy of a suspension bridge. Like in California, you have like the Golden Gate Bridge, right? The whole bridge is suspended on two pillars. You have the first pillar and then the second pillar. And that's how I look at the day, that your AM routine and your PM routine are the two pillars. And then the whole bridge is your life. So if you have the AM and PM routine dialed in properly, you can handle all sorts of chaos or whatever, all hell can break loose on in and so if in a bridge, if the am the pillars are strong, then it can take any amount of weight, right? Any amount of cars. You can look at like just those two pillars are supporting this whole bridge. That's how you got to look at your life, is that if I can dial in my AM and PM routine, I can be resilient and I can handle anything that what a life can throw at me, you know. And that's a sort of proactive approach I want people to take, is that just design your day in a way that you can handle life.
I think that really resonates on both ends, because if you start to take more agency of the beginning of your day, it means that you're setting yourself up for success. And conversely, if you take agency and control of how you end the day, it's giving you closure on the day. So presumably you're going to bed or to sleep more calm, more at peace with whatever happened in the day and whatever might happen tomorrow. And it's simultaneously setting you up for success tomorrow because you have a better night of sleep. You wake up more rested. You then in the morning set yourself up for success, and so on. The cycle continues. As you're saying, the support of the bridge hangs on.
And that creates a upward spiral for people. And so my work is helping people develop those two areas, and I tell people to start slowly. Implement practices that first improve your physical health on both ends, your AM and PM routine. Then when you're comfortable with those areas, we talked about, kind of connecting with the earth and circadian rhythm, body and food. But then we can then work on more of the mental pieces, right? Some of these breath work and things like that comes into play. And then when you are comfortable with that, you can move a little forward and go beyond that and work on the emotional aspects, right? And then really work on your connection with yourself, in a sense that what what do you really want to pursue? How do you want to design your life to be, or what do you want to stand for? And you can ask these more deeper questions and work on that content. So it becomes this journey where that AM and PM routine can over time develop and be enriched, and it will also evolve with you, so that instead of starting with 10 different things, I say, like, let's start with one or two things, and put it in there, grow into it, and then build from there, so that 5, 10 years from now, you have this very, very rich routine that's already built into your system. It's your body automatically will just do it when it wakes up, because it's been carved over time. So hence the idea of the title of the book is Primal Health Design, is just to help people kind of design that type of a routine.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on something that is crucial there, that sometimes gets misinterpreted. That is, in that design phase, people nowadays tend to think something is wrong with me at like a mental level. Like, I'm not wired for this. I can't do enough. And just like you're saying, it's important to start at the hardware. So what you're doing with your body mechanically, biologically, because a lot of those issues that you think are software or with your mind are actually consequences from the physical level of how you're handling your body. And giving people that grounding of physical first, mental second, it's quite special.
And Jose, I think that is such an important statement you just made, is that a lot of people who say that oh, I cannot meditate, or I just I cannot focus properly. Well, if you're at that state, the main thing is not to teach you meditation, right? It's to actually track back and see how your physical health is, right? First of all, right? Because, if you get less than 6 hours of sleep in a night, you should not even attempt meditation, because you won't be able to get into that space. Your body just wants to sleep, wants to catch up on sleep. That's what your body wants to do. The last thing you want to do is try to focus at that point, because you're just not biologically, you have a sleep debt that your body is trying to make up, right? So same thing, if you're eating in a way that your body is very, very inflamed all the time, right? And you're eating a lot of inflammatory foods. Same thing, your body is not positioned to even focus, just because of your food pattern. So unless we get these parameters right, we cannot move to the next, the mental aspect. So that addressing all those physical aspects first is very, very important. So when I talk about designing a AM and PM routine for somebody, the first thing is all these basics. You know what I'm saying? Let's get your connection with the body right. Let's get your connection with the food right. Let's get you aligned with the natural rhythm, so you're sleeping well and everything like that. So we have to build from there.
I think it's quite fascinating that our body is such a developed machine, and it handles so many incredible processes, and is able to sustain us through 80 years or 90 years or 100 years. But sometimes we struggle with identifying exactly what's going wrong, because it's like we're discussing, for example, some of those consequences, some of those downstream issues that come from malnutrition, bad sleep hygiene, they end up coming out as consequences in your mental health. And so it becomes actually difficult to then track back to, oh, this is a physiological problem with my body, not with my mind yet.
And that is also in medicine, in my world, we we have a very much of a reactive medicine model, right? A reactive model, meaning that the problem occurs, then we deal with the problem, right? You get the
Right.
headache, then we try to fix that headache with medication, or then we try to get you a CAT scan and see what's wrong with it. How come this headache is not going away? And then maybe, like this. But now you have the headache, and you're going to address the headache with some medication. Or you cannot sleep, we're going to try to give you a sleep medication. You have a shoulder problem, we're going to try to give you some surgery to fix that shoulder problem, or injection in the shoulder. But nobody asked, why did the shoulder problem develop in the first place? What type of misalignment led to the shoulder problem? What type of physiological misalignment led to the headache? Or what, so I think that it's very, very important to just track back and say that, where did you fall off the track in the first place that led to this problem? And that's my work, is that I want people to realize that, fixing the headache is not going to fix the root cause, right? Giving your shoulder injection is not going to fix the root cause of misalignment, because ultimately the other shoulder will start hurting because you're still misaligned. And even if you got that shoulder injection. So that unless you fix the misalignment with our primal design, it will not address any of these issues in the long run.
Is there some specific tool behavior that you'd recommend for, even us as potential, observers of ourselves in the long run? Do you recommend any sort of tool for us keeping that sort of history, for us to start potentially identifying those patterns when okay, shoulder is hurting, let's go to the doctor, and I have this sort of mental Rolodex or physical Rolodex of things I can tell him to better understand the root cause?
So when I work with people, um, I used to ask a whole battery of questions to figure out where the gaps are. And some people are pretty healthy. For example, like a lot of people that will interact with me from a health perspective, right? From a physical health perspective, are in pretty good shape, right? And they're doing many things right. But then they have issues more in the mental area, emotional area, and things like that. So what I did was, after going through a lot of questions and whatnot and developing these questions over time, I took all those questions and I made it very, very simple. I made this, what I call it, is a primal alignment index. And it's on my website. If any of the listeners here want to go on, it's a free assessment. I just made it available free. You can go on the website. My website is my name, Kavin, Kavin, Mistry, Mistry, MD.com, all together. So if you go there, there is something called a primal alignment index, and which will ask you questions that will probe all these areas, about a little bit about your sleeping pattern, your focus, your relationships, and everything like that. And the goal of this quiz is that at the end, it will take you a couple of minutes to do, is at the end, it gives you where the gaps are. It gives you a score. So the score, I think, is around like 100 or 105, which is like the full score, but it'll tell you where you stand. Let's say you score 70, which you're like, okay, I have some gap, but where is the gap? And it will tell you where those gaps are. So we created this free assessment on the website. Once you know your gap, let's say, Jose, your gap, you're physically in great shape, you're doing everything that normally we would recommend from a primal perspective. But let's say your gap is more in terms of relationships, in terms of, connection with people. Let's say that's your gap, because that is an important part of health as well. How
Mm-hmm.
we relate to ourselves, how we relate to others, and that's one of the things that's also in the questionnaire, is that, that emotional health and our relationship with others. Let's say that's your gap. Then it will also tell you what are the resources to kind of address that. And one, it's like, it will perhaps recommend a chapter in my book you can read, to kind of address those resources. I also have a master class that is offered. It's an online class where people can go through. I have a 21-day program to do a primal reset program where you want to totally reset on all these levels. Then you can do that. And so, it will even recommend some modules on there as well. So anyway, that's a free resource that's available for people.
And Kavin, I think this was actually a fantastic segue because we're reaching the end of the podcast. So the question I have for you now is, where can people connect with you and your work?
Sure, Jose. So again, I just mentioned my website, kavinmistrymd.com, which has all the links for the socials. I am on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn. So if people can find me there, they can always reach out to me, send me a message. If you have a specific question, specific issue, if you do the primal alignment index on the website and you have some gaps and you want to answer a question, you want to ask a question of how can I fill this gap and be healthier, you can always send me a question on LinkedIn, and I'll answer it.
Fantastic. Kavin, thank you so much for this conversation. It was very illuminating with plenty of actionable insights. So hopefully you can get a good number of people back to their primal design.
Wonderful. Pleasure talking to you, Jose.